With Robert Downey Jr. being announced as the next Doctor Doom, I think this is as good a time as any to take a look back at the MCU, where it's been, where it's going, its ups, its downs. This is I Have No Title and I Must Podcast, the show where we discuss any and all aspects of pop culture. We are your hosts, Tyler
and Chris.
And before we start breaking things down, what do you feel like is like your journey with these movies? Like, does it stack up with how a lot of people feel, or are you kind of like the outlier, or...
I might be I feel like I am very similarly minded to Ryan Airy from Screen Crush. When I watch him, our opinions are like 85 to 90% pretty similar on this stuff. It's like we want it to be good, and when it's bad, it is disappointing, but I'm going to watch it. I'm going to try and watch a good, again, 80 to 90% of the stuff. Did I see those Groot shorts? I did not. Few things that I haven't watched. And I'm more willing to give something like a bit of a pass unless it's just like insanely bad, because I want to see something get better. Now, I mean, some people would argue you have to be critical and harsh. And I was like, what am I going to do? I like hack Rotten Tomatoes. It's weird that I absolutely did not plan this, but we ended up talking about DC. And now we're talking about Marvel. For some, it might be an embarrassment of riches. Like, we're coming in off the heels of Deadpool, which, yeah, it's extremes. We're talking about extreme decisions, extreme gambling. Deadpool, in its first weekend, has surpassed the entirety of what the Marvels made for its whole run. We're talking dollar bills. And that's not good. I saw that movie, and I didn't hate it. I guess it just... maybe it's not made for my demographic. And I'm saying, like, I like Iman. I like what she did in the movie. I don't hate Brie Larson like other people do for some reason. I think she does pretty good, too. And they're the two main stars in it. Now, I cannot think of the actress's name that plays Binary, or the other Captain Marvel, but, trying to really, like, boost her up and give her a place and have it be, it's like 3 co-stars. I don't have a problem with this. And for them to be women, it's like, how is that political? Yeah. I don't understand. But here we are, Deadpool being your basic, like, Marvel version of a Transformers movie. It's mindless violence, and sometimes bit of gore with a lot of storyline elements from, say, mostly low. It's not bad. If you like some mindless violence, go for that. But we're gonna go back to the beginning. For me, I talked a lot about the DC, my history with the DC universe. It was through that when I was growing up. That's all. Almost like all the time. Even if you're watching old TV, you get George Reeves and the Superman from like the 50s and 60s. I think it'd be I want to say 50s. I don't have that information in front of me anymore, and I didn't have all of it then either. And then into the Batman 60s, and then Superman all in the 80s, and then Batman, and where is the other stuff? It's like Marvel had a presence with cartoons.
I think that's because Marvel didn't really come into its own until the 60s.
Yeah, like really when Jack Kirby and Stan Lee started like doing their major releases. Yeah. It's about like 61 to 63. It's like all the major heroes that are on the big screen now are making their like page debut, so they would need time to get established. Spider-Man being a really big one, having a lot of cartoons. Fantastic Four had like those weird, like, I don't even know what, like, still
like
cartoons.
Almost like the Hanna-Barbera-esque.
Yeah, but like they don't move. Or if they do, it's extremely rare. Like or like, the ones where it's like a still image, but they cut out the mouth and use a real person's mouth to talk. It's unnerving, but anyway. I think there was like a weird attempt at a Doctor Strange movie that ended up being something else, and there's a Japanese Spider-Man movie where he says he's the emissary of death. That's wonderful. I haven't seen the movie. I'm just talking about the idea that Spider-Man would come in and say that. And also one of those versions, I think he has a giant robot because, it's Japan. And there was a Spider-Man. I think there was maybe even a couple of Spider-Man movies. Not good, but on par with the technology of the day. And then there's that Fantastic Four movie. Oh, there was the Hulk TV show which I did actually watch a fair amount of, which they did have a movie crossover with Thor and Daredevil.
Seems like a weird pairing.
Yeah.
Thor and Hulk, okay, but the Daredevil.
Matt Murdock had to defend Bruce Banner in court.
Ah.
Yeah, so, and then, obviously, Thor, you know. And then there was that Punisher movie that people tend to forget about. Not the Thomas Jane one, but there was, like, another one before that. Then Blade puts everything on the map. Like, Blade kind of really, and I think people want to forget about Spawn and it being in kind of this weird no man's land, but whatever your feelings are about Spawn, I really feel like it should be thrown into the mix when talking about the evolution of, like, you know, Blade to X-Men to Spider-Man, because it really pushed things forward. All of these things help to push things forward and put legitimacy, like comic book movies, to a legitimate level. You know, if you like The Matrix, you're probably gonna like some of these. So even if you do not consider, or if they have fallen away from what is considered cinema, I'm sorry, it's not every Iron Man movie is going to be the third man, but sometimes you just want to, I mean, not every gangster movie is The Godfather either. And some would say not every Godfather movie is The Godfather.
It's like sometimes with gangster movies you need to slip in a Smoking Aces.
Yeah, just some like jokes and violence. Sometimes people just need a release. And you don't want to go into something and have it be like Eternal Sunshine of the Spotless Mind like every time.
Sometimes it just needs to be fun.
So Marvel had to fracture the rights to their films in, I think it was the 90s, where they sold off the rights to like certain properties to various studios.
Fox had so much, Sony had so many.
And that's how we got where we are now, where they couldn't use the X-Men, they couldn't use Spider-Man for a long time, but they did have the core Avengers. So that's what, when Marvel decided to try and start making movies, and with what they, you know, what it would end up being the MCU and would end up being Marvel Studios, they started with Iron Man, which they said like, oh, he's this like C-list or C-tier character, nobody knows Iron Man. And I was like, he had his own cartoon show in the 90s. Like, who doesn't know who Iron Man is? He's like prominently featured.
I think it's more that he was like the B list. It's like he's up there. People know of him, but they don't know him.
I mean, I had a conversation. This is something that I've seen come up a lot lately, whereas like casual viewers still don't understand the thing with like, but the X-Men movies are the MCU. The X-Men movies are Marvel. Yeah, but they're not. And they don't keep up with this, you know, like business minutia bullshit. And beyond that, some people don't recognize the difference between DC and Marvel.
Yeah.
And I actually had to explain to somebody who watches all of this stuff, but doesn't read the comics, they just watch everything they get their hands on, that Daredevil was not DC. And they're like, are you sure? And I was like, yes, I am as sure of anything as I can be. Daredevil is not DC, nowhere near it, but let's move on. And they walked away from that conversation still wondering if I was wrong. She doesn't listen to this show. Anyway, so they picked Robert Downey Jr., who at the time, this is something that I actually have listened to a lot of people talk about this, but nobody's mentioned this. They're just befuddled and were bewildered by what's happening now. What's it gonna be? Why are they doing this? Is Marvel out of ideas? Yeah, doing a variant is kind of what they're doing right now. So no, that just is the idea that they've been going with for a few years now. Back me up. If I start talking about Doctor Doom, you gotta back me up, because that is...
We'll get to that.
This is most likely going to be a multi-part thing discussing the MCU as a whole. This is something we've literally been talking about since before episode 1. That was one of my first things, is like doing an MCU episode, because it's laid out right there. I think it is a perfect time to do it, because this year we had one release and it wasn't even an MCU movie. I don't care how much anybody wants to say. Deadpool is like a refugee from another world.
It's kind of being like shoehorned in.
Given that this is the year they're taking to reevaluate things and kind of, I'm not saying do a soft reboot, but they're going to try and come back in fresh. They're going to extremely scale back what they're doing. And yeah, so we're going to get to all that, I promise. The reason Robert Downey Jr. was such a controversial pick at the time, it wasn't like, you know, like, can Heath Ledger pull off the Joker? No, people knew he was, but he was a flight risk because he'd had a drug problem. And He'd been in and out of court, in and out of jail, in and out of random people's backyards and houses. And it was, is this guy gonna something up? Is he gonna stick around? Is he gonna, how's this gonna go? Well, it turns out Robert Downey Jr. is the best success story that I think, if you think your life is in the drain, look at Robert Downey Jr. Is he kind of a dick? Probably. But I think he's earned that because he has thrown his life away so many times and been in the throes of drug addiction and probably alcohol abuse as well, and has now come back from that. There's no way that he could be doing what he's doing right now if he were still imbibing. I think he's probably got like a strict regimen of things keeping him on track, but it looks like he is. And I wish him luck with that, especially because that's an extremely difficult thing. And most people do not make it back from that. Most people manage it, but you can tell they're not all there. They're not doing well.
Or they have like a major relapse.
Yeah, which is, oftentimes painfully obvious and is in the media. So, and I remember going to see Iron Man in May 2nd, 2008 at the old mall here in town, which no longer has a cinema in it. It moved across town. It was really good and surprisingly good. The trailers looked good, and I wasn't a huge Iron Man fan. So going into this, I was like, I didn't necessarily. It was always everybody's dream that Marvel or DC would form a cinematic universe. This is what everybody would be like, oh, but man, what if Christopher Reeve showed up in Batman? Are they in the same universe? Or, what if they started over and then they could do all these crossovers? That would be great. Or if they could release all these movies and then do an Avengers. And Kevin Feige apparently was having these same conversations as a teenager and an adult and went straight on into making plans to working his way up high enough so that he could make this happen. And did. There was a Hulk movie not too long before this that was weird and very complicated.
Kind of terrible.
Depending on who you ask. I don't love it. But I think it had some good ideas.
Yeah. I don't remember much about that one. I remember I went and seen it because a friend really wanted to go see it, so me and him went. But that's about all I remember.
I am not a big Hulk fan. My dad was. I'm not. I don't get it. I mean, if every time what you got was the Frankenstein story, or we deconstruct the concept of Frankenstein meets Frankenstein's monster meets Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde and make it be this really cerebral kind of but it's usually just the military comes for a man and a man turns into a monster and beats the military every time.
I do wish they would give Hulk at least one more solo movie, just because I think Mark Ruffalo is a good enough actor that he needs his own vehicle to kind of shine on his own outside of the ensemble.
He's never had that. He's never had that opportunity. So Iron Man was great. I think Iron Man did really well, and it established a lot of things moving forward. And they were making plans then. That's the one that at the end Sam Jackson comes in.
Yeah.
They do The Incredible Hulk. If anybody doesn't remember, that's the one with Ed Norton. Ed Norton was a bad pick for that because he was never gonna.
He wasn't gonna stay around.
No. If you wanted consistency, he's looking for, he wants to be in cinema. He was just, slumming it up down here with us comic book nerds.
It's one of those, been there, done that, came here, I did it, I'm moving on.
Yeah. He wanted to, do one and get out. Harrison Ford's probably only going to be in one of these, and that's probably all they got him for. Also, don't pick a guy who enjoys crashing planes.
Yeah.
We do not know how bulletproof he is. All right, so the third entry in the MCU is Iron Man 2, which is by some accounts the worst of the Iron Man films.
I would disagree. I would say the third one.
I'm kind of just cool about a lot of these. They're not the best or worst. They all feel kind of the same to me for a lot of these.
Still kind of finding their footing with some of them.
Yeah, letting Robert Downey Jr. do his thing, which he did perfectly. I think he embodied this character. If anything, he kind of established a certain tone for, how this character would be affecting the comics, even. A lot of the movies reverberate back into the comics now, so that casual comic book readers can align themselves with what they're seeing in the movies, since the movies are far more accessible. The stories are simpler, they're more self-contained, as opposed to like getting on a comic run. Then, and Jon Favreau directed both of these. Mm-hmm. And was in both of these, so clearly, and is still involved. He was in, this is extremely minor spoiler if you haven't seen Deadpool, but he does have a small scene in the new Deadpool movie. Then Thor, which was directed by Kenneth Branagh, and I don't think Kenneth Branagh even had a cameo in it. He just directed this. He directs and is in some of the films that he's in, and is an actor who really loves directing and acting, and is sometimes in the movies he directs. I think he did a great job with that one. And also, I want to take like a little aside here to talk about 3D. 3D is one of those things that it's okay to make fun of and make people feel bad for. It's one of those things that, like, I don't know, I can't think of there's probably a million examples, probably like my life in general, or like being neurodivergent or whatever. It's like, we just accept that you're gonna be made, like, we're gonna make fun of you and make you feel bad about this thing that everyone agrees with, and you're stupid. This thing is stupid. I'm smart. I don't do that. You. Okay, so I don't get, if you have headaches from it, I've heard people say, like Mr. Sunday from The Weekly Planet and Mr. Sunday Movies. James something. He says that he hates 3D because it gives him a headache or does something to him. Okay, then, don't do that. I mean, like, you know what? Whenever I take a hammer and put my hand on a table and like smash the hammer on my hand, it really hurts my hand. But I learned after never doing that not to do it. So if you don't like doing that, it'd be like, I like listening to music really loud because it enhances the music and makes it cooler for me. Okay, do that. Some people don't like it. Some people are like, oh, it's too loud. I enjoy 3D films. I feel like it enhances the experience. It doesn't give me a headache or anything, which you would think it would.
My only issue with 3D films is I feel like they shoehorn in scenes where something's flying at the screen.
Yeah. That
doesn't work.
Like My Bloody Valentine was like that.
Yeah.
They would just throw stuff at the screen.
Yeah. That doesn't work once it comes to home video.
I think we should do an entire 3D episode where we talk about movies in 3D, the history of it, and what have you, because movies are still getting... Now, the thing is, they have a technology now that makes the movie 3D. It's shot in 2D, but it makes it 3D. And it's not as good as when the movie is shot in 3D. I think Coraline is maybe like the best example of, and it's stop motion, so they had to make, I may have talked about this like in one of our earliest episodes, they had to make these special cameras because when they tried to use the regular 3D cameras and they were going to shoot it in 3D, the placement of the images was all like wrong and it did not work. So they realized what the problem was is the size of the figures. They had to use the camera lenses needed to be as far apart as the doll's eyes. So they had to make a special set of lenses to shoot in 3D that are probably the only set of lenses, and they're only good for stop motion animation with dolls about that size. I wasn't fully prepared to like go into all this, and I shouldn't. This is just an aside. I enjoy 3D movies. And you know what? I saw Deadpool in 3D. There's a few things that happen in it that were specifically designed to be one of those things where you're talking about. Given that the 3D was actually like pretty good in places, like kind of in some ways shockingly good, which either they shot some of this in 3D. I don't think so. I think it was they used the digital transfer, which got really good, I guess. It is always better if it's like Avatar is shot in 3D. I did not see the second Avatar, but like that first one, it's like you see all these and it's crazy. It's like you're seeing in more 3D'er than real life somehow. Like, how is that possible? But usually what happens to me is I'll settle into the movie And it's almost like if there's something distracting, then you kind of ignore it. And the 3D, I stopped paying attention to it until something really layered happens. One of the coolest things that I had seen was in Thor, at the end of Thor, when they freeze the electricity coming out from like the Bifrost. It looked like so 3D in the theater that I was in, and it brought me right back to that. And I just thought, not only is this a pretty cool scene, but like this layered effect, it's like something you would go to see in an art gallery. It's like, put these glasses on, look at this thing real quick. Oh my god, that's a really cool thing. And then you'd take your glasses off and set it down, and you'd walk away from some exhibit. And I thought, this is actually pretty cool that it looked like that, or like in that was Thor. I could talk about this for a little bit longer. Thing is, it must be commercially viable or they would stop. But my theater wasn't packed, but it wasn't empty either. I don't think at the time I went Thursday night it was packed anywhere, at least not here in town. Friday probably was. I couldn't say about the 3D. I wasn't there for that on Friday night, but just to say, I remember seeing Thor in that, and so much of it because the visuals like looked so cool. Or like when Odin like banishes Thor to Earth and he like flies backwards and all of his armor is coming off and it's like coming right at you. I think for some of these, yes, they took advantage of a pre-existing idea or scene and did that, but not all of these. Most of these were just digitally transferred and not shot in 3D. So for something, and sometimes I think it was an afterthought that the people who are doing the 3D said, we're using that, we're gonna push that. And there's some movies that like are not in 3D that have a moment like that that you're like, oh, that would have been perfect in 3D. You're like, almost like, did they think it was gonna be? Was that designed for that? And it just didn't end up being that. Anyway, just wanted to say, if you don't like 3D, don't go. I do, and I don't see why you hate something like you know what? I hate bluebirds and joy too. Like, if I see a butterfly fluttering around, I find a little girl, I point it out, I smash that butterfly. Some people like stuff, okay?
I feel that way about these Marvel movies as a whole. If you're tired of them, don't watch them.
Yeah.
It's like, are there a lot of them in cinemas? Yeah, but don't worry, there's a lot of other trash you can go watch also.
Yeah, just go find the next Too Fast, Too Furious or whatever that's your thing. I don't go out of my way to make fun of you for watching bad movies.
Because as much as I love movies, you have to admit, look at the landscape right now. Is there anything out that is not a sequel, a reboot, or adapted from previous media?
If there is,
it's on the indie scene.
Yes, it's an indie movie and
limited release.
We don't get to hear about it. If it even gets a release, a lot of those are either straight to some third or fourth tier streaming,
left to the film festivals.
Yeah. And you don't hear about them. This goes back to Andy Warhol. I think Andy Warhol made bad art to force people to say, well, that's bad. And then that creates the debate. Well, what's good? Have you been to an art gallery lately? Nah, that's not for me. But you have an opinion. Maybe you should take an interest. And that's the thing is like, I don't like cinema. I don't like what's going on. Well, maybe you should get involved. Maybe you should find what you do like. Find good cinema and support it. Find some good indie films that are not getting money or recognition, or get involved to the point where you're making better. You go out and make a film and make a good film.
Or
I know it sounds daunting, but
vote with your wallet.
Yeah.
Spend your money on the other things.
Which goes back to what I was saying earlier about like, I do support these things. I don't know when they're going to be bad, but I don't go back and rewatch it when they are. I don't think they should make an Eternals 2, but that's jumping ahead of myself. There was Captain America, and then, which I'll be honest, I wasn't a Captain America fan before that movie. And that's when I completely realized, like, any bad property, and I'm not that Captain America's a bad property, but any property that you're not a fan of, if it had the right writer behind it, can drag you in, because I thought it was amazing. I thought that was one of the outliers.
So I think I've said this about some Doctor Who episodes. It's like when you see the preview, you're like, that's going to be terrible. And then it becomes your favorite episode.
Yeah, that can totally happen. And then we go into the Avengers. That was yet again, they were really looking for like spring, summer releases. All of these were May, June, May, July, May, for up to the Avengers. And that established, that's the first phase. That established what the MCU was going to be, how it was going to look, how it was going to feel. And therein, they kind of sandbagged themselves. They handicapped themselves a bit because they became too rigid with what they wanted to do from even maybe before this point. Because they had approached Edgar Wright, who's one of both of our favorite directors, to do Ant-Man. Now, I didn't know you at the time, but I'm sure that if we could have had a conversation about this gossip or rumor, or, like seeing that he's signed on to do this, we'd have got really excited to discuss this. Ant-Man, I love Hank Pym, so I was a little disappointed that it wasn't going to be Hank Pym, but Hank Pym was going to be in it. It's just an older version, not the Ant-Man. So what I've read, everybody knows now, if you don't, that did not happen. They used a good chunk of the script he was working with and had written on, and he was still listed as a producer, I guess.
Yeah, but a writer.
Yeah, and did not end up directing the film. They were saying they wanted more action, and I don't think they could foresee or had seen his films. His films have such a frenetic pace, and the beats and the structure of how things move have this energy to them that you don't need of action, like action, for it to feel like you've just like experienced something fast-paced and impactful.
Yeah, I think that's the difference with this movie and why it wasn't received as well, because I think that's the difference between a Edgar Wright written film and an Edgar Wright project.
Yeah.
Because that might have been his script, that was not his movie. And it is very easy to tell in the way it was handled.
Yeah, and I think they said they didn't even add that much more action in the end product. Of course, I don't know. I've not seen the original script, and I definitely haven't seen what he would have cut together, but I have seen all of his films, so this ain't...
Yeah.
It would have been so much better. So anyway, Phase 2 starts with Iron Man 3, which you said was your least favorite Iron Man film.
And I want to preface this by saying that the movie itself in a vacuum was not a bad movie. Just some of the things in the movie I don't think they handled well.
Like the Mandarin?
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Because I know Jon Favreau said from the start that as long as he was in charge, he wasn't going to do that. He's going to keep Iron Man more grounded, like kind of like Nolan's Batman kind of thing, but not as dark. But then the first movie he doesn't direct, it's like, we're getting the Mandarin. It's like, all right, we're getting the Mandarin, but we don't.
Yeah.
At that point, I feel like you wasted Ben Kingsley. I feel like you wasted the Mandarin, because even for someone who's not read a lot of the Iron Man comics, the Mandarin is a big deal in those comic books, and you just completely wasted it. Because I know Favreau was talking about keeping it grounded, and then you go in with the main villain of the piece having those kind of powers. It's like, it just felt like a slap in the face.
Yeah.
It's like, if you're going to go that route, you should just left the Mandarin out entirely and then brought him in later. Because again, Ben Kingsley, fantastic actor, would have been perfect for that role, but you really didn't have him in that role. He was just there.
Yeah, and was for a punchline.
Yeah.
In the end. So, but we experience a deconstructed version of Iron Man. At that point, Robert Downey Jr. was kind of the flagship, the leader of, not the leader of the Avengers, but he was the icon of the MCU. if anyone were going to be.
Oh yeah, for sure.
He definitely embodied that, more or less a mascot. Started wearing the glasses, I think at some point, like outside of there, and would do, there was that time he presented that kid with like a prosthetic arm, and it was an Iron Man arm. He did a lot of charity work, like kind of, not exactly, but there was a blurred line. He did give an interview one time where he was asked like, are you really Tony Stark? Are you really kind of like that at home too? Is this who you are? And he's like, no, my wife would leave me in a day if I were like that. So there was Iron Man 3, the one you said you didn't like, followed up with Thor: The Dark World, which is, by some accounts, at the time, like not at that time, but like for a long time, was considered like the worst MCU film. I went back and watched it like a couple years ago in preparation for something, and it's not like as bad as people say, like just in comparison to other things.
Yeah.
Like it was pretty bad. But I mean, it's got Kat Dennings, and how bad could that be?
And the Doctor as the Dark Elf.
Yeah, Christopher Eccleston, which I kind of wish they'd eased up on the makeup on there and let kind of him breathe a bit, as but then I also do get mad when they don't. Like, it's just like, it's a person, you have like Gargoyle, and then somebody comes in that's just a regular guy, like, it's Hugh Jackman playing Gargoyle. They didn't bother with anything or CGI, nothing, no makeup, like not even like rockifying his cheekbones or something. Nope. Okay, whatever.
I know a lot of people's issue with this also also stems from like a multi-movie level here is when they kill Loki to bring him back.
Yeah.
To kill Loki, to bring him back. They said kind of like it loses its impact.
I think the thing they wanted... Yeah, for that, if that doesn't become like almost like a running joke or something, that like it's not like he's immortal, it's that this is our running joke. Like, it's what way are we going to get out of it this time? That we're going to keep using this character no matter what. And also kind of depended on fan reaction. If fans hadn't like loved the way that actor portrayed him as much as they did, they might have left him dead and gone with something else. I don't know, but they didn't. I mean, obviously they already had like an end credits scene where he had taken Odin's throne, so that was something they were already going to do anyway. Then followed up by one of the outliers in what people say was like one of the better MCU films is Captain America and the Winter Soldier. Pure espionage, and that's one of the things too, is like you can see the wild range of types of films they were trying to do. Yes, a lot of these films do look a lot alike with the color grading and the costuming. It's definitely made by the same studio. It's definitely made by the same creative force, especially the people at the very, very top, handpicking the people to make them. I think this is Anthony and Joe Russo's first MCU film.
Oh, that's something else I forgot to mention. The Russos are coming back. So I know we mentioned that in, was it the Superman one?
I think
we need to bring the Russos back?
Yes, because that is a huge deal. Being the best team, outside of James Gunn, who would come next? Bringing in the Guardians of the Galaxy, and then there was Joss Whedon with the second Avengers Age of Ultron, which I think by most accounts is also the worst Avengers film. Not terrible, just not great. Which is, I mean, I know I have to take like a firm stand. Like Thor the Dark World, I couldn't even say like that movie was shit. It had Kat Dennings.
Yeah.
Did you see Kat Dennings in that? She was in that. What were we talking about?
Kat Dennings.
Oh, right, yes. So, back to Kat Dennings. Anyway, this was, that was the end of 2014. Not the end of 2014, but like almost. What is tomorrow, August 1st?
Yes.
I think
Yes.
August 1st, Guardians of the Galaxy 2014, the first Guardians film. This is the first MCU film that I saw coming up that I was like, what the this is like one of those like, who asked for this? No one asked for this.
I think at this point too, people talk about Iron Man being like a B-list or C-list. The Guardians were like unknowns.
Yeah.
Especially for anyone familiar with the original Guardians comic books, completely different.
Multiple runs of this comic and still nobody knew who they were. Like hardcore. Some hardcore fans, comic book fans, didn't read Guardians of the Galaxy. Yeah. Like, you gotta be in it.
So, like, the only reason I knew about the Guardians is because in one of the Spider-Man animated series, they had Nova. And then Nova talked about hanging out with the Guardians.
Yeah.
And then from there, it branched off and I learned about them.
So, Guardians of the Galaxy, I go to see it because I was like, they've not really let me down yet. And it looks good. It looked like a pretty big departure from what had been going on, but I went to see it out of curiosity and to support this company that I have supported my entire life. And it blew me the away. And James Gunn did such a great job with it. And that's all I'm going to say. He's going to get enough of my money and acclaim in the years coming forth. So I don't want to spend too much time on that. Avengers Age of Ultron. And then we come to Ant-Man, which we've already talked about a little bit. That one was maybe the biggest disappointment for me. Not because the movie, they did like the heist thing. Like, we're going to do a heist and we're going to talk about stuff, and then it's going to go into a montage of what we're talking about, and then it's going to be like, is it really happening? Are we still talking about it? Or is it actually happening now and we're doing it? That sort of movie.
If that's the route they were going to go with it, they should just brought in Soderbergh to direct it.
Yes. And that's the end of phase 3. And there were 2 MCU films that came out in 2015, Age of Ultron and Ant-Man. Going into phase 3, we start with Captain America Civil War, which brought in Spider-Man to the MCU. And I don't think... There's some other stuff that I did want to mention, like, that are canon or maybe not canon. They're doing, like, they're picking and choosing, like what we can make work, what was not just a failure, but such a bad failure that we're going to pretend we didn't do that and non-canonize it, like Inhumans. I did not watch Inhumans. I watched enough of it, clips and bits and pieces and reviews that I was like, I'm glad my dad's dead so that he doesn't have to know about this. Bad. Just to say, Inhumans was one of his favorite comics and some of his favorite characters that he would tell me about, and they never get used in anything. They don't have their own cartoon. They sometimes get featured if the Fantastic Four has a cartoon or something, but they were scheduled to get their own movie. I don't remember where that was in the timeline, but it's coming up around this era, around this time, and they had a show that got made, and it was so bad that we're just going to pretend it didn't exist. Not you and me, but the company pretends it doesn't exist. Hey, it's really, you can find it if you look for it on Disney, but you gotta dig.
Are they going to try and make it a Mandela effect? It's like, yeah, didn't you guys make that?
No, not at all. What are you thinking of? You're thinking of X-Men.
Yeah.
Isn't X-Men awesome? We got him back.
It's like Eternals. No way, that wasn't good either.
It was looking like they weren't going to get X-Men back for the foreseeable future, and Fox was just going to keep milking that cow until the cow ran dry, and it was never going to run dry, so they made Inhumans, which is, for some, I'm not going to say it's like discount X-Men. It's like space X-Men almost. Like, they live on the moon. Their powers are not natural, but they're like given to them through a process, and most of them are much more monstrous than most regular X-Men type mutants. Anyway, yeah, which they brought the actor who played Black Bolt back in the later Doctor Strange movie, and he got to get killed. So, but redeeming himself they got him a better costume-ish or whatever, and yeah. So, I love Captain America Civil War, but it does not, I feel like they should just wipe down where it says Captain America and put Avengers Civil War, because it was an ensemble cast. Like, Iron Man, Robert Downey Jr. is in it a lot, and it feels more like an Avengers movie than a Captain America movie. I think that, it's like, you can kind of say he got his own third film, but kind of not really.
Yeah.
I feel like they should have saved that for something else that was really Captain America-centric. That's just a nitpick. That's not the worst thing ever. And then we go into the first Doctor Strange film, which was also, I think, like, really good. I don't know if Benedict Cumberbatch was the perfect pick for that, but he's who we're going. So, what are you gonna do? I know. I'm not saying he's bad. He's okay. I'm just saying.
It's like, who are you thinking for a replacement, if not him?
Christoph Waltz. I had a bunch of picks, and not to say that he wasn't even on my short list. He was one that I thought could have done well, depending on how it went. Johnny Depp would have been okay. Always trying to think of, like, what would he have done well with in this, and I really feel like in the MCU as a whole, and I really feel like that's one that could have. And people are like, Jack Sparrow? Yeah, that's the only character he's ever played. I can't think of anything else he's ever done. And they don't have a lot of character actors on here, like a lot of actors. Except Chris. Just too many Who's the guy? Chris Evans. No. Chris Evans, I don't think gets enough credit as an actor. I just want to say that. Like, I love him as Captain America.
I'd say, like, having Chris Evans be part of this, just for the interviews you get with the cast after, is probably worth having him as Captain America. Because I've seen countless things. It's like, who's the Joker on set? And he'll be like, oh, we all get along pretty well, pretty professional. Don't really have any jokers. Then everyone else is like, he said that? It's because it's him.
Yeah, I can't get away with anything at work anymore. As if somebody else does something to with somebody, I get blamed for it. You can't be so predictable. But anyway, or give it a cooling period and then pull off something really big, like chocolate covered hot dogs or something. Anyway. But yeah, Christoph Waltz, which they went with Mads Mikkelsen for the villain. that would have been maybe a little too extreme. Because I do think it needs to be someone who can do an American accent, like, really well. And for some reason, Maz just doesn't. He's just Maz Mikkelsen, and that's what you're getting. But then what he does with it is pretty amazing.
And can I say, with the Doctor Strange movie, spoiler, but if you haven't seen it at this point, what are you doing? That's probably the most creative way to defeat a villain.
Mm-hmm. Oh, yeah.
Yeah, I thought that was great. It's like, I can't beat him, so I have to come up with an alternative. And I thought that was the best workaround.
Yeah. The whole, like, the guy that, Benedict Wong, the guy that plays Wong, one of the best additions to the MCU. You know, like, nobody's gonna, except for Robert Downey Jr., and even then, he doesn't, you know, it's just kind of him being him, but, like, nobody just outshines anybody else. They all seem to work really well together as an ensemble. And then when you get, like, weird pairings, seeing the different people meet in the, you know, like, into the post-Infinity Saga. And yeah, I have just loved seeing Wong in everything. I think he was one of the best additions to it. I thought he was going to be a little too stoic, but then he was just hilarious, which I was like, is this going to be too much? No, because he's just funny and it works, so just run with it. And this was actually, I do want to say, this was a film where it maybe had too many jokes, and the second time I went back and saw it, there were some things I felt like were added in ADR where they were like, is this not funny enough? Is this not MCU funny enough?
Yeah, we've discussed this many times, but it's the Guardians effect. It's like, that movie was funny and it worked, so now everything has to be funny.
Yeah, and they really wanted to punch that up, and that became maybe the biggest point of contention. I think even other than people complain about them looking the same or the color grading or whatever, I think I could live with that if each movie felt like it had its own identity to a degree. If it's funny, let it be funny. But don't take, like, at least a serious portion of a movie and, like, when he's, like, trying to get into, be accepted, and they took out there was some deleted scene with a dog, like I don't know if he was, like, feeding a stray dog or something. And then they finally let him in. I think they open the door and he falls backwards inside and is like, thank you. And it just felt like you didn't have to add that. And that was clearly added in, I felt like. Unless, like, it was going to be an outtake where it was an ad-lib on Benedict Cumberbatch's part where he just said that, made the crew laugh, you know, because he's off frame. Like, that's clearly a cut. You don't even see him. And then they just somehow said, like, oh, we should put that in. That was fun for us. Anyway, I do love that movie on the whole. The other stuff, again, that was the movie that was, like, made for 3D. I'm not saying made for 3D. I mean, like, conceptually, if you're thinking about, like, what would be the perfect 3D film for anything, a Doctor Strange. Like, look at those 60s and 70s comics when they were making them. It's just, like, wild, crazy ideas. There's Guardians of the Galaxy 2. Same again. Writer and director James Gunn. Awesome as always. He had an idea for what they were going to be, and then earlier on, it became more obvious where they're going with this, which is the Infinity War. They're building up Thanos. That's going to be in the background. They don't do a whole lot to build him up. That is one key complaint that I will have for the whole thing leading up to Infinity War, is they just had little cameos. So you know who he is, but they didn't do anything to build his character. And I really feel like there should have been a little more of that. Other than, well, he's been in, like, he had all these appearances. Yeah, but it was just, he was kind of snuck in, or he's just there, and he's a bad guy.
Yeah.
That's my big critique for that. That feels like a missed opportunity with how long they had to develop him. Now, they were going to rectify that with Kang, or they're actually going to have him be, like, a character, like, really in stuff, you know, like in the most recent Ant-Man, in Loki. He's just a part of the, you know, is he kind of neutral? Is he a good guy? Is he a bad guy? Is he, you know, he's like not just the bad guy of the film, but like he's in there the whole time because you're dealing with him. He's not just like the boss waiting at the end of the movie to fight. You're dealing with him the whole time, and you're getting some backstory, you're getting some character development, and because he's a time travel character, you don't know if you're dealing, and also a multiversal character, you don't know if you're dealing with the variant that we're going to be dealing with later, if you're dealing with at what time frame you're dealing with. Is this affecting something in the past, or is this going to be affecting something in the future? And at what point will he flip-flop? So Kang's always been one of my favorite characters, and I wanted to see what they would do with him. Sadly, that's not going to be a thing. Then, finally, they did not buy Sony. They didn't have to buy Sony to do this, but they did strike a deal with Sony so that they could do a joint venture, and the MCU, Marvel Studios, could make a Spider-Man movie. But they had to change some things for some, I don't know, like, they still, the weird thing is, from my understanding, Marvel, like, the company Marvel, still owns the rights to the Spider-Man action figure, like the merchandising, which is weird because I guess that's why it's like certain movies get good action figures, certain movies didn't.
I do know that whole thing of behind the scenes stuff is why we didn't see that many Fantastic Four comic books during that time.
What they started kind of doing with X-Men toward right before they bought Fox too.
Yeah.
They started kind of scaling back the importance of the X-Men and like how they were perceived in the Marvel comic book landscape, which I think is bad business.
Yeah.
To be sure. I know it feels like advertising for your competitor. It'd be like if DC movies were making Iron Man and they just like killed off Iron Man in the comics and just weren't making Iron Man comics until they could buy him back to make movies of him again. That'd be crazy weird, but that's kind of like what was going on. A different company owned a thing that you're making an advertisement for with action figures and comic books and whatnot. It's complicated. And I do not like monopolies. I do not like that one company is going to own like the IP of every thing and control all that. But I just want Marvel to have all of Marvel's stuff, and the only way that they're going to do that is to like buy Sony and buy all these other companies and for Disney to own everything. And I do not like that.
Or play the waiting game, let the contracts run out.
Yeah, which is... I think that's what happened with like the Hulk. I want to say I think it was Universal that owned him. I'm not 100% sure on that. I can't even remember how that Ed Norton Hulk movie got made, because a lot of people I think remember that isn't an MCU movie, but it actually is.
Yeah, I think it's because the other Hulk projects weren't really going anywhere, so they didn't really care. They're like, yeah, have it back.
Yeah, and also like the weird kind of, they made it like it was kind of a sequel to the other one, but like a reboot at the same time by its intro. It's like he ends up in kind of the same situation, living in like South America or something, working at some factory in the middle of nowhere, but has a different backstory as to how he ended up there. So I think if people saw those two movies back to back, they'd be like, wait a minute, what? And very few people are paying as much attention to detail like this as you or I. So anyway, we are coming up to what I set as a boundary for the end of this discussion. There's Spider-Man we brought in. It's another movie that Iron Man was in that, right? I'm having trouble remembering.
Yeah, I think he might have been, yeah.
Because he gave him his suit. I am wondering now. I am really questioning. I will just click on this because I feel like now that I've said that, he wasn't. But
he was.
No, he was. No,
Yeah.
You're right. He was, at least at some point or another. And also Donald Glover and Michael Keaton, who I love, and it was so awesome to see. He was like in the process of making a big comeback, and I mean, I guess it's one of those, don't call it a comeback because he never went anywhere. He was always just kind of making movies, but he was like with Birdman and this and a few other projects, it really felt like he was back on the map. And
Doubling down with the bird characters though.
yes, and coming back as Batman, and maybe not the actual original version necessarily, but very close. I thought it was good. I thought Tom Holland is a good Spider-Man.
Yeah.
Closer to the right age and than any other Spider-Man that's appeared on screen, even if they've looked good.
And he can do his own flips.
Yeah, he really committed to that. They had to change some things. They couldn't use like classic old Aunt May apparently, and then Mary Jane had to be changed drastically, so they changed like her name so that she still has the moniker MJ, like the initials, but her name is actually different. And then they didn't use Harry. They used another guy. I think it was based on John Genki or something from the Ultimates comic. That's who, and I can't remember the guy's name, but he's like the man in the van, his, IT tech guy in the background, who also apparently becomes the Hobgoblin at some point. Future possible spoiler for that if they end up doing it. Who the knows? They're crazy over there, Marvel. They'll do anything. Then, okay, so my hard line for like ending this discussion was Black Panther, and we're 2 movies away from that. And I know we had a lot of asides going through these. That's why I do this like this and just kind of go straight down and give a few comments on this. It might seem kind of boring, but it's the asides you come in for. It's our you underestimate our ADHD, and that is the power of where this discussion will take us. So, we're up to Thor Ragnarok. I love Thor Ragnarok.
Yeah.
Okay, like, I loved it in a way that I had not loved a lot of the films as of late at that time in the MCU. I was worried about it. I didn't really know Taika Waititi from anything else. I think he did an amazing job with this. And this was another weird one, as it was they had started releasing some in the winter. There's Doctor Strange was released November 4th, 2016. Ragnarok was released November 3rd, 2017, almost a year later, or read it a year later. Went to go see it. Loved it. And me and my girlfriend actually went back to go see it Thanksgiving night that year while it was still in theaters. We had like done all our family stuff. We were gonna do some late night shopping that night, and it's like, well, we have some time to kill. This is movie theaters open. Do you want to go see this? We did. I loved it just as much. It's just the right, like, they made it a comedy. It's almost like a buddy cop movie or something with just every weird thing you can imagine. And it worked. I don't feel like they shoehorned in anything. They wrote a funny script to be funny, and it's funny. I really feel like nope. It wasn't there. I really think they let Chris Hemsworth shine in that. That was when, now we'll get to some stuff later. That's why I wanted to focus on this for a minute. Then again, by later, I mean when we get to it later on in the second portion of this discussion, which you'll have to come back for to see what I say about possibly the same thing, but done badly. And I do have as strong opinions about that as I do about this. But I don't love everything about it. I actually think like Hela was kind of like a weak sort of plot point for this, but just the whole like getting sent to the weird other world, like the junk planet where Jeff Goldblum's in charge and he's got his melt stick and everything looks all Jack Kirby-ish, and they just leaned into the weird classic comic book stylings and looks of everything. They bring Loki back into it in a major way. He gets to be funny in a like situationally, and that's really the first time I think that we really get to see Mark Ruffalo shine too as just himself, because when he is himself, he does not want to be there. He's just a normal guy. He doesn't want to be put in any of this situation. He's not a superhero. They worked so well together. It was lightning in a bottle, and in such a way that had not been done before, or really probably not going to be done. Like, this is one of those, like, what if situation. Like, what if we just team up Thor and the Hulk?
It's like, what if we just completely cut out Beta Ray Bill from the story altogether?
Yeah. There's some things that they, like, there's always, man, they really missed a trick with this. But for this one, it was just the right amount on a lot of levels.
So, I mean, we could have had a Planet Hulk, like, on its own movie.
Yeah.
That just kind of combined Thor and those storylines together.
And that's really, that's what this was. So, it just also had, like, we had to get back to Asgard and dealing with Hela. One thing I didn't like is the killing of the Warriors 3. I felt like that was something that was dealt with as callous as Zack Snyder saying, let's do something fun with Jimmy Olsen. Like, let's just have some fun with it. And they make him like a badass war journalist that they just kill off screen.
That they don't even tell you is Jimmy Olsen except in an interview after.
Yeah, that was not to say I'm the biggest Jimmy Olsen fan, but
they done him dirty.
Yeah, that was a character that, like, we're just we just don't want to use him, so we're gonna do this to him. It feels perverse and whatever. So anyway, there's that. That's what they did with the Warriors 3. I thought they were really great side characters. They worked really well, and I guess they just did not want to use them. They could have said, like, they're off-world, they're off dealing with something on the far reaches of space, or they could have killed one of them.
Yeah.
And had that be, like, a really impactful moment, but it's just her, like, whip, 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 like, knife throwing and whatever she's doing. A bit too much, but I feel like on the whole, it was showing that, like, they could do an Edgar Wright movie. I think what Edgar Wright had said at the time was, you know, he wanted to make a Marvel movie, but Marvel didn't want to make an Edgar Wright movie, and I felt that. It was, you know... It's too stylistic. It's too stylistically far from what they were doing at the time. And it would have felt like an Edgar Wright movie and not like a Marvel movie. But that would have been okay. It would have been a blend. It would have been Edgar Wright does this. I mean, and I don't think it would have been so far as if, let's say they bring in Wes Anderson.
Yeah. We've
all seen that little trailer that some people, maybe it was Patrick H. Willems, made, and it's like, that really is what it would be like. Black Panther is where I drew the line for reasons. It's the next film, and it's the last film that I want to discuss today. Now, if you're looking at a list the same as me, or if you can't quite remember where it falls in line, it's the last film. It's not the last film of the multiverse saga, or before the multiverse saga and the Infinity Saga. It's not even in the last 5, but it is the last movie before Infinity War. So, given that, that's where we're going to stop talking today. Black Panther was also, yet again, it kind of returns to stylistically like what they'd been doing, but it is extremely culturally relevant to like Africa and dips into something called like Afrofuturism. Ryan Coogler wrote and directed this, wrote with Joe Robert Cole. So I cannot talk about this movie from a black experience because I am not black. But what I can say is that this movie made a lot of money because people who had not been... Yeah, I was going to say it made $1 billion. I forgot and I didn't want to say that. It did make $1 billion on a budget of $200 million and being over 2 hours long. It made over $1 billion. That's with a B, billion. If you give people something to show up for, same reason why Obama won in a landslide. When people do not feel represented, when people don't feel like when they feel like they're being ignored, they will ignore. But when they have representation and when they feel like, oh, that's like me, I finally have something to show up for, they will show up for it. And they will support things.
Same as you. I can't speak from the black experience, but from a character study, fantastic movie.
Yeah.
Like, well written, well executed. And I think that's what makes Killmonger such a great villain, because on some level, he's not wrong.
See, I disagree with that. I mean, like, I do at the end. Never mind. You go ahead. I'm not going to get into this.
I mean...
No, you go ahead. You're probably... You go ahead. You talk.
I was going to say, because...
He's right. What should we do?
I mean, his methodology is clearly wrong.
I'm not hearing that that's what you were originally saying.
But how he got to that point, I can very much see that, of how easily someone would slip into that direction.
Yeah.
And feel slotted and want to take out and go to those extremes.
I had certain issues with him at the end of the movie, and it's like, and their structure is, and this, I think it points out how, like, a non-democratic society, like if you have a dictator or a king, and if your allegiance can shift just based on murder, you know, like a Shakespearean tale, it's a very Shakespearean tale. If you just kill the king, but you're part of the bloodline, so you're elevated to king status, and your view on that, let's say your right-hand man disagrees with all of these things, and you were truly loyal to the original king, but because of your views and you're honor bound to allow your allegiance to fall to this terrible person who will murder and kill and devastate to do anything, that they want to do. And that sort of person is so easily corruptible that it's wrong, but you have to support him. I think it's a good mirror, and I think it's a good time to bring up a story like that. Now, they definitely aren't saying that's a good thing. That's not what the movie is telling us. I'm just saying, while I'm watching that, and I'm watching the, Adore Melage, throw their allegiance to fucking new king, I'm like, come on! Just go get T'Challa, and which makes it all the more exciting when he comes back, and that's your classic hero's journey, you have to be weaker than the villain when you come back, and it's nega Black Panther. For when T'Challa finally does win, it's earned, and he is the king. And rest in peace, Chadwick Boseman, because I really feel like he was really gonna bring us in when Robert Downey Jr. was eventually, we were getting to a point where he was looking like he was gonna move on. We didn't know, but one way or another, he was gonna take more of a backseat role or just leave entirely. And Chadwick Boseman was and also maybe Chris Evans. I really thought going into Infinity War that Captain America was gonna die, and that they weren't gonna kill Iron Man, but that he was just gonna leave the mantle or something. I really thought it was going to be the opposite of what they ended up doing, and that Chadwick Boseman was going to be the new obvious leader of the Avengers, and that is not what they did, is not what they could do, because he died, and they have not in a sense, they have not replaced him. They didn't recast him. They were never going to do that, and they didn't get a new, I think it's going to be Shuri, right? I think she's going to be, is the
girl that played his sister?
Yeah. So I watched the new one, and I've already forgotten how that ends. Just her fighting Namor. But anyway, we're jumping way ahead. So that was, and my phone went off, and Martin Freeman. I want to say Robert Freeman. Robert Freeman is the grandpa from Boondocks. Martin Freeman does a great job in his role there.
And Gollum. And
yeah. Yes. Too great. Martin Freeman he's what you get. What you're going to get with Martin Freeman. I always keep saying Robert Freeman. I've been watching Boondocks lately, most nights. Anyway, I'm so sorry. And you put his name in my head. Now I can't. Andy Serkis. Famed character and CGI actor Andy Serkis plays a real person in this, and depicted maybe better than, which he'd already been in Age of Ultron, so he's a returning character, has the cool arm thingy, and this is another situation where I think the departure from the comics is actually warranted, and they made it work. In the comics, I think it's just a full body red suit with a mask thing, and he's got a satellite dish for a hand or something. I'm
trying to remember, what character was he playing?
It was, if you hadn't asked, it was, let's see, Michael B. Jordan, and you're going to edit some of this out. Martin Freeman is Everett K. Ross. Winston Duke is M'Baku. Is he even in this? Okay, Ulysses Claw. Yeah, he had an episode in Earth's Mightiest Heroes.
The memorable villain.
Yeah. Sound power. Anyway, they did a good job with this, because Andy Serkis is always good. So this is where the discussion ends for today. The MCU up to this point, I mean, especially putting out a movie like this that made over $1 billion and established a new baseline. Yes, it does still the color grading problems are still there. It still looks the way it did. Yes, the villain. These are all the massive nitpicks.
I mean, to be fair, the color grading in most movies is unless it's Wes Anderson. He stole all the color.
and pasteled it. But yeah, one of the other big main critique, there's either always like a blue light in the sky or it's a nega version of the superhero. At least for the first, outing. Okay. What did they do? What was being done in the DC EU or whatever, DCU, and a lot of other, I think that's an okay establisher. If we're talking about character stories, you have your foil, and if it's a deconstruction of like who and what this person is, they should be faced with a mirror to see an evil version of themselves. Should that be the way it is every time? Well, it isn't that way every time. Like the Guardians of the Galaxy did not fight a separate team of Guardians. I mean, unless you want to count like certain things as check markers or milestones within that movie to say like, well, they kind of did. Okay. And I'm not saying that these critiques are invalid or wrong. That's a fair assessment. Like, that is exactly what has happened and is most likely going to continue happening for the foreseeable future. It's also bound by, they only have so many characters. I mean, there are a lot of villains out there, but a lot of the main ones are those, like Professor Zoom or the Reverse Flash. Guess whose villain he is? And then there's like the white costumed Batman. Batman, but he's in white instead? It's exactly Batman. His name's Bane Roos. It's weird. And then like Bizarro just sucks. Like, that is not even the same. I know there's a billion like basically Superman villains that are Superman, but Superman's a really great example of the opposite, because his biggest villain doesn't even have any superpowers. He's just an evil genius, and he figures out ways to just kind of fuck with Superman or like put people in danger to bind him. This is the best example of what people want more of, which is somebody with the opposite things. But given that's what DC has done almost every time, even up to recently with Zack Snyder, which is, we're gonna do Lex Luthor again. It's like 7 out of 8 movies that have been Lex Luthor.
I think that's the direction they could go with the Hulk movies, is instead of Army trying to catch the monster, bring in the leader. Yeah. He's as smart as Hulk is strong.
Which I think is still on the table. Actually, I think he might be in this next Captain America movie. So, well, no, maybe. Black Panther was great, and going into the final 5-ish movies for this phase, and going into what we're going to be talking about next time, like into Endgame or Infinity War and then Endgame, and the other things that would come to follow that, because right after that, the real world had a bit of an endgame, which was the pandemic. And it drastically, that's going to have to be a point of discussion, that drastically changed how we even viewed movies, and that we didn't for a long time. Like, we didn't go to the theater. I remember going in and it smelled like mildew and stale bread, and it was nice to be back, but it wasn't. It was scary. I mean, if you believed you could get sick, I did get sick at one point, and that was scary. We were building to a point of this all, the MCU, what felt like it was coming to an end. It's like, where do they go from here? Saying goodbye to a lot of the legacy characters and moving forward with new characters. Chadwick Boseman, they got really lucky with him to have found him, and for him to be as good as he was, what he was doing, and then he died, and that sucked so much. It was like, oh, now what do we do? And I don't mean to trivialize like what he went through or his death or anything. I'm just saying, like, from this viewpoint and standpoint where I'm looking at it, it sucked for us because he would have been so good. Yeah. I never met him. I don't know him. I assume I hope he was a good man, and that he is well missed.
I mean, just what he went through, like, to be able to hide that, he did what, 5 movies?
And some voiceover work
within that span before he passed away, just so his family would have something when he was gone.
That's hard as nails.
Yeah.
So that is why I chose that as the cap and not another spot, because it was such a high point, and it felt like, okay, we're reaching the end of what this is going to be, or what it has been, but we're going to enter into a new era, and we definitely have some really good character leadership here with Chadwick Boseman, and we can move into Black Panther 2, future Avengers movies, and what have you. And I don't know what they're going to do with it, but I felt more comfortable with that. And Benedict Cumberbatch, I felt like, was going to be a good addition to the Avengers, a new version of the Avengers that was going to most likely be led by Chadwick Boseman as Black Panther. So some of you know where where we go from there, but you don't know what we're gonna say about it, so you have to tune in next time for some of this is really triumphant and some of it is sad. And I wanted to go ahead and talk about Chadwick Boseman a bit in correlation to Black Panther. He is not gone yet in the timeline of the MCU and what we have yet to discuss, but I think unless you have more.
No, I think that's a good place to wrap up. Be sure you give this video a like. Be sure to subscribe. We've got plenty more to say about this topic and working on getting some guests on the show in the future, so be sure to subscribe so you can see that when it comes out. But if you made it with us this far, thank you. Be sure to follow us on our social media. We're on Facebook and Instagram. We'll leave links below. And until next time, see ya.